Mondays and Wednesdays I do a class at a community corrections facility with a group of fathers, as well as I co-facilitate 2 Tuesdays out of the month on a bi-monthly basis at the Fathers Club, which is held at the West Philadelphia YMCA at 52nd and Chestnut Streets. And what I'm doing with the fathers there at the Fathers Club, I'm beginning to do a healing class for the 2 days, simply because there's so much that the fathers have to contend with in terms of emotional stability, involving them trying to have more time with their child and meeting some resistance for a variety of reasons. This is not about a bad mother or bad father. This is about 2 good people who are in a situation that they need some assistance in. So pretty much when we left off last week, we had just talked about the comparison of punishment versus discipline. So today I just want to make sure that we're very clear on the significance of both. But most importantly, before we even get to that aspect of it, we have to look at why children even act up. If we remember when we were children, how we conducted ourselves when mom wasn't around or when dad wasn't around, and how we conducted ourselves when we were in their presence. There were behaviors that they were teaching us to not display while we were in the home. Either these are things you don't do because they're unlawful. These are things that you don't do because they're immoral. These are things you don't do because they just get on my damn nerves. And it's a variety of reasons why a child acts out. And we talked about this little in depth in class. Children misbehave when they don't feel well. A lot of times we don't even realize that our child does not feel well. And when they do say they don't feel well, oftentimes we ask them blanket questions, and if we get a specific response, then we make a determination as to whether they're really sick or not. Well, now let's bear in mind that as an adult, I'm 52 years old, I'm talking to an 8-year-old. An 8-year-old is saying, I don't feel well, Dad. And I'm asking questions such as, well, what hurts? Well, nothing hurts. Well, what do you mean you don't feel well? Well, I just look at if a child doesn't feel well emotionally, how do they express that to you? Do they say, I don't feel well emotionally, I feel down, somewhat depressed, somewhat anxious? I don't know what I feel, I just don't feel well. Is there a test that you're having in school? Is there a situation with a bully possibly at school? Are you having some difficulty in seeing in class? What exactly is going on with the child? And a lot of times we don't have that discussion. A lot of times we just say, listen, you need to go to school. No, you're okay, you'll be okay. And we still haven't addressed what's wrong. And when it goes unaddressed, that means it lingers, that means it begins to evolve into something else. Because if I can't manage my emotions, what will I do with them? The same thing a child does. If I don't know what it is that I'm feeling, I may get a drink, I may use a drug, I may use another person, I may act out aggressively, I may yell at people, I may scream at people, I may be detached from the rest of you know, the world and begin to isolate. I don't know what's wrong. So there are some questions that we need to ask, but most importantly, we need to be paying attention to some signs that there's a possibility that there's something wrong here. If you just separate it, there's definitely something wrong. If there's conflict between you and the other parent, and the child is exposed to it, either directly or indirectly, there's something wrong. We keep addressing things with our children from the perspective of an adult. And as an adult, we're supposed to have developed some skills over a period of time to better manage our own condition. And sometimes our own condition trickles down to the child, and if we haven't managed areas of our own lives, how do you think it's going to affect the child? Because it will affect the child in some capacity. If you get frustrated because you don't know how to ascertain certain information from your child, then the child gets frustrated. The next thing you know, you're saying things or doing things to the child that are unwarranted because of your own inabilities. Sometimes children misbehave because they lack knowledge and experience. Children lack the experience and knowledge which adults have in terms of, I may say, you know better than that. When your brother picks all the flowers out of the yard, you know. But the 2-year-old doesn't know better than that. Do I know better than that? No. I followed somebody else doing it. I saw my brother doing it, so I followed my brother. I didn't know it was wrong. Have I ever been told that picking all the flowers were wrong? Have I been told that picking the flowers are wrong? So if you talk to one child and say to a child that they know better, but the other child is doing the exact same thing, I'm confused. Why is he doing it? Why is he doing that? When we begin to look at punishing a child, when we begin to look at disciplining a child, the first thing we have to look at is what our intent is. What is it we're seeking to do at this point? A lot of times we don't even know. When we talk about effective discipline helps children learn to control their behavior so they act according to their ideas of what is right and wrong, not because they fear punishment. For example, they are honest because they think it is wrong to be dishonest, not because they're afraid of getting caught. Think about it. Just think about it for a minute. You're going to discipline the child for picking all the flowers from the little garden. They saw flowers. They were excited about the fact that they were flowers. They know their flowers are beautiful. They know that you, as their mother, likes flowers. So they want to get flowers to give to their mother to make their mother happy. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you chastise the child for picking the flowers, now you are telling the child, you're giving the child a mixed message. Because I thought you loved the flowers. Now you're yelling and screaming at me for picking the flowers. But where was my education? Where was my learning of how to go about picking flowers and or pleasing me as your mother? Because there's two sides here. So then you teach the child the significance of leaving some flowers for another day, for another person, for having the ability to admire those flowers, for being in the garden. Maybe teach them gardening. Maybe show them how important it is to plant the seed, to water the seed, and to watch it grow as you are watching them grow as a child. But if you plant the seed and water it until it sprouts, and then stop watering thinking you can do it on its own, it eventually dies. It begins to wither. It begins to wilt. Its condition changes. It no longer exists. Much like that of a child. If you have a child and the child sprouts and you stop feeding the child begins to wander aimlessly, begins to internalize information outside of you, and that information, because it's not as you have given them, will begin to be presented in your home. And when it's presented in your home, now again, you want to tell the child that they're wrong. Wrong about what? You shouldn't do that. I shouldn't. Why shouldn't I do it? Did you ever teach me otherwise? No. No. When I asked the fathers, because it was a questionnaire that I gave to the fathers, and I asked, what is discipline? One of the fathers said, teaching your kids about their behavior and how they will learn from their choices. Another father said, punishment. That's what he defined discipline as being. One of the other fathers defined discipline as being an action in which one may be punished in a manner of harsh talking, beatings, punishment. Another father wrote, discipline is self-control with oneself. Now let's not get caught up in the definition and how they verbalize the responses, because this is not a grammatical test. This is a matter of developing understanding of conditions that exist within the individual and how we can change those conditions. When we look at punishment, there are actually 4 different types of punishment. There's physical punishment, which entails slapping, spanking, using the switch, paddling, and using a belt or hairbrush. I got physical punishment with whatever was nearby. My mother didn't play. If my mother was like 5'4", 5'5", maybe $120, no nonsense. She had the responsibility of raising my sister and I, and she just wasn't having it. And one of the things that I talked about in class was that we have to take a look at our own frustrations. Here is my mother had to take the responsibility to raise 2 children. My mother didn't want children, but she had 2 children, and she took great care of her 2 children. But the frustration of having to do it on her own, the frustration of having to work for certain hours in order to be able to take care of her family, the fact that I looked like my father, which was a great issue for her because I reminded her of him, and every time she looked at me, all she could think of was this man who had abused her, physically and verbally abused her. So now we're talking about a cycle. My mother and I had a discussion a couple of years ago about how verbally abusive her mother was towards her because of the relationship that she had with her father. Her father spoiled her. She was a daddy's girl, and there seemed to be some conflict in the home between my grandmother and my mother because of this relationship. So my mother said my grandmother tended to be a little harsh than needed to be because of this relationship. So now this is a cycle that began with her mother, because obviously the relationship with her mother, her parents were as such because she presented that with her own children. So my mother gave it to her children. So that means it was given to me, and then I would do what? Pass it on. Somewhere along the line, I had to stop the cycle. I wasn't one who, I really didn't spank my children. I was verbally aggressive. And that is just as harmful because that's the second one on the list of the 4 kinds of punishment, and the 2 that I'm talking about at the moment are the 2 that cause the most trauma to a child. Verbal punishment is when you call them outside of their name, you refer to them in terms that are derogatory, such as you know, you ain't this, you ain't that, you know, you just like your father, you're ugly, you're stupid, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. Those things are reinforced within a child's condition. And they begin to believe those things, and then outside of you, somebody else says the same thing. Now, if you say that I'm stupid, if you say I don't know anything, if you say that I'm ugly, if you say that I'm nothing just like my father, and then somebody else outside says it, wow, it's got to be true. It's got to be true. And now this is what I believe about myself. Now my self-esteem is greatly impacted. Now that means that I'm more likely in this condition to get involved in negative behavior. May begin to use drugs and alcohol. May begin to act out aggressively towards my peers. And just bear in mind that verbal and physical punishment work hand in hand. The more louder I am towards an individual and the more I'm in their space, means that I am bigger. I'm much bigger now because I have voice as my power and I have my fist as my power. Now look at the size that I am now. Look at the size I am now. So to those smaller than me, I feel humongous over them, and I begin to treat them as such. Why? Because children see us as giants. They see us as giants. So what does that mean? That means that the giant is stepping on my neck, oppressing me, making me feel less than. So when I'm around other children, I do the same to them. I do the same to them. But physical and verbal punishment also reinforce that the way to resolve conflict and confrontation is through aggression and violence. It's through aggression and violence. So when we keep talking about how our children today are so aggressive, how they have no value for life, we need to ask ourselves the question why. Not keep going at them. Ask ourselves why. And then ask them, what have I given you to make you feel this way? And a lot of times they won't be able to tell you that because you told them to shut up, that they don't know nothing, that they don't have any business talking about this, that, and the other. Now they don't talk to you. So you've conditioned the child to not even have any dialogue with you. Because if I say something that you're not in agreement with, what do you typically do? You yell and scream at me. You hit me. So I'm going to sit down and say to you nothing. Nothing. I'm alright. I'll be alright. No, I'm good. I'm cool. Nah, you don't have to get me nothing. No, I'm cool. I'm good. You conditioned that child to be that way. Don't blame the child. Take responsibility. And oftentimes we blame the child for their condition. But it's our responsibility to raise them. How do you turn around and act like, oh, they're doing so much wrong, but you haven't really demonstrated to them what right is. You haven't taught them the freedom of choice. You haven't taught them to understand right from wrong. You've taught them that if you do this, I will whoop your behind. So it's a matter of fear. So when a person lives their lives grounded in making decisions based on fear, not right and wrong, they're going to always make the wrong decision. Even if they make no decision. I don't know how to make a decision without a threat behind it. And then I'm afraid to make a good decision because in my mind what I used to think was good, you've told me is bad. But you didn't tell me it was a bad decision until after I did it. But you gave me no options. You didn't teach me about options. You didn't teach me about how to sit down and think things through, how to understand consequences, which we'll talk about when we talk about discipline. The other form of punishment is withholding rewards. Now, many of us do this greatly. You can't watch TV if you don't do your homework. No homework, no TV, no Xbox, no telephone. Speaking of telephone, not to get off track here, somebody posted something the other day, I believe it was on Facebook, and asked a question as to whether or not their child took their cell phone to their room when he went to bed at night. Why would you? That's a little sidebar, because if you're sending a child and you're saying go to bed, I got my phone with me, what's the likelihood of me being on the phone all night? Either on the phone texting, sexting, talking. I'm not sleeping, and I have to go to school in the morning. What do you do with your phone? How many times during the course of this show did you pick up your phone and check to see if you had any emails or any voicemails, or you go on Facebook or Twitter? How many times in the 30 minutes that this show was on? Look at how many times you go to your smartphone. Just look. Look at how many times you go into the computer to go online. Just look. So that's another item you take away. I'm going to take away your notebook. I'm going to take away your Kindle. And the last one of the four is penalties. You broke the window, so you will have to pay for it with money from your allowance. Form of punishment. You broke it. Therefore, it's coming out of your allowance. Okay. And someone said, yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah, it probably does, if I'm acting irresponsibly. If I'm acting irresponsibly. How many times as a kid have you been playing a game and accidentally hit somebody's car, somebody's window? Or even hit somebody? It happens. And that's a punishment, and I understand you want to teach a child responsibility, but you didn't really teach a child responsibility. Did you? You taught me that if I don't do this, I'm taking that. And what am I going to do? I will deprive someone of something because they didn't do something I wanted to do. Case in point, the rate of domestic violence amongst teens is on the rise. It's on the rise. Why? You don't have sex with me? I won't love you. I won't be with you. You don't do this for me. I won't do that for you. Why? And if you ask them why, they can't really, with any validation, justify why. That's the way I grew up. That's how I was conditioned. So they try their best to explain it, and while trying their best to explain why I'm not giving you this, and I'm trying to explain it to you, but I'm being more harmful with my my reason. I'm being more harmful. Well, because, you know, that's what you're supposed to do for your man. And why the reason I said you're being more harmful, because now this individual is instilling in this person, the other person, misinformation, and begins to groom this person to believe that this is what you're supposed to do as a woman. This is what you're supposed to do as a man. This is what you're supposed to do. See how this cycle is developed through our own condition. Our own condition. So the first two kinds of punishment, physical and verbal, are not considered to be effective discipline methods. We've established that. The other two, withholding rewards and giving penalties, can be used either as effective discipline methods or as punishment, depending on how parents administer them. We were talking in class, and I asked the guys, I said, well, what do you think about giving a child a treat while acting out on the floor? And most of them say, okay, well, he'll stop. And one said, no, I think you're reinforcing that behavior to continue, because every time he wants him to act out. What it came down to was, there's an explanation. The candy, or the sweet, whatever the treat is, will stop the behavior. Now comes the educating piece about the behavior. Follow me? So it's important to understand that discipline is the most effective means to move a child into learning and to being conditioned to practice or not to practice that behavior versus punishment. We're at the hour. I thank you so much for joining in. I'll see you next Friday, where we'll be wrapping up this episode here on punishment and discipline, and we'll begin to look at the blended family. Thank you for joining in. Again, you've been listening to Side Spot. Stay if you like. Continue to listen to the music. Enjoy. Peace.
10 seconds.